Hi everyone and welcome back to a new Diablo 4 video. In this video, we will explore a ball lightning build featuring the new Vampiric Powers. With Frozen Orb on your side, you'll be able to unleash a soul Maelstrom accompanied by swarms of bats and cursed souls that will leave hordes of enemies in your wake, allowing you to clear any endgame content faster than the speed of light. Nightmare dungeons tier 100, blood harvest, Helltides, Lilith, Duriel, you name it, won't be a threat to you any longer. The ball lightning skill is stronger than ever before in Diablo 4's second season, making it one of the most popular elements of sorcerer builds today. The entry barrier is very low as you only need some luck to find the gravitational aspect, which makes the balls not go straight anymore but orbit around your character while dealing up to 25% increased damage. The enhanced ball lightning passive increases the ball's damage rate by 200% of your attack speed bonus, which scales well with the new Vampiric Powers. The new Vampiric Powers introduce many unique effects accessible to everyone playing the season. I've spent quite some time optimizing this build's damage output and believe I have reached the sweet spot between damage reduction stats and damage multipliers to make this an enjoyable experience when getting the gist of this build. This build would be capable of neglecting any damage reduction stats on your gear as long as you eliminate enemies before they get to see you. I did countless runs with this setup but decided to invest at least 2 to 3 damage reduction stats to wander around comfortably. There might still be situations where you need to reconsider your strategy of jumping in straight or die. The Butcher remains the real threat, and there's still plenty of room to exchange some of the damage-related Paragon glyphs for damage reduction ones as you are going to see later on. The essence is to have balls surrounding you at all time, ideally casting them before going in. Flame Shield is used for diving into packs with barriers, as the balls might disappear in this process, also to restore mana and become unstoppable. I use Ice Armor for increased barrier uptime and mana regeneration, but it can be exchanged with any other skill, like Arc Lash, for Vampiric Power synergies. Our first enchantment is Chain Lightning, which automatically forms after spending 83 mana thanks to the reduced cost of the Enchantment Master legendary Paragon node. It will also act as one of our mana generators to keep the balls flowing. Each cast restores 10% of our mana via the newly updated Static Surge Paragon legendary node and can make enemies vulnerable. Furthermore, it will spawn crackling energy around us non-stop, which contributes to resource generation even further, and also works well together with the overflowing energy key passive to reduce our lightning skill cooldowns. The second enchantment is Frozen Orb for a 1/3 chance to release Frozen Orbs. These will constantly fly in all directions as you will cast ball lightning nonetheless and chill and eventually freeze enemies on its way. It also supports triggering lucky hit effects. This enchantment allows us to use the Hoarfrost passive for damage to chilled and frozen enemies and also unlocks a bunch of chilled effect related Paragon nodes. I'm a big fan of Frozen Orb and its visuals, but you can also go with Fire Bolt if you prefer the burning effect and Devouring Blaze more than this, and either stick to burning instead of chilled effects or leave out Chain Lightning entirely and use both while heavily focusing on mana regeneration. Let's talk about the gear. On the helm, we are focusing on total armor, maximum life, and the aspect of disobedience for increased armor for 4 seconds when dealing any form of damage. You can also go with the new Godslayer Crown unique item for a damage increase of up to 60% to enemies getting pulled in. This effect can only occur every 12 seconds and lasts 3 seconds though, which is why I decided not to use it. The chest piece has the ever-living aspect for less damage from crowd-controlled or vulnerable enemies and should ideally focus on damage reduction affixes. However, you can also go with Raiment of the Infinite to maximize your damage, but be aware that you will be losing a lot of damage reduction by doing so. It can work, but there are situations where the additional damage reduction is doing wonder. On the gloves, we are using the accelerating aspect with affixes around intelligence, attack speed, lucky hit chance, and restoring primary resource on lucky hit. Intelligence could be exchanged for critical hit chance. Alternatively, and if you don't like the Frost Orb enchantment, you could go with the Frostburn unique gloves for a chance to freeze enemies. The unique pants item Tibules can massively boost our damage by up to 40% while unstoppable and for 4 seconds after. When using teleport, and we do this every 4 to 8 seconds, this has almost guaranteed uptime all the time. It also restores 50 of your primary resource when becoming unstoppable. This item is not required to make this build work, but you will significantly profit from its damage increase. If you don't have it, focus on pants with ranks to ball lightning, and more damage reduction related affixes. For the boots, Asu's Heirloom is the go-to option as we benefit twice from it as our attack speed and critical strike chance scale the increased movement speed. While it can provide more than 30% additional critical strike chance, it also has critical strike damage and mana cost reduction. This is also not a must for this build, and you can use alternatives with similar stats, like this one with the Conduit aspect, for additional movement speed. Especially with reducing evade's cooldown on attack, you could use the teleport enchantment to constantly jump from location to location as teleport's evade cooldown will always be reduced in no time. This will allow you to move even faster than with the Asu's boots if you like the teleport effect on evade. We use a wand for additional lucky hit chance, all stats, intelligence, and other damage-related affixes to boost our damage. It has the conceited aspect for increased damage while we have a barrier active. The amulet carries the crucial gravitational aspect for maximizing the damage of ball lightning. It should have movement speed, mana reduction, ranks to mastery skills, and an affix for the passive of your choice. You should look for Elemental Dominance, Glass Cannon, Hoarfrost, or the Devouring Blaze passive, if you are playing with Fire or Burn. On that note, it's possible to go full Glass Cannon with this build, with 8 ranks and a 48% damage increase, but it will also increase any incoming damage by something like 24%, which becomes a challenge on its own. The Undying Vampiric Power can help you stay alive longer if you want to give it a try. The ring has the control aspect and comes with critical strike chance and resource generation. You are quite flexible in there on which stats it should have, so feel free to explore and test alternative versions with lucky hit, vulnerable, or damage to close and stun enemies. That being said, it might be slightly better to have the control aspect on the amulet and the gravitational on some other piece, but these are minor nuances for fine-tuning. The second ring comes with the Stormswell aspect for multiplicative to vulnerable while our barrier is up. You can focus on similar stats as for the first ring. The offhand has the aspect of retribution for more multiplicative damage to stun enemies and a chance to stun distant enemies. I'm not fully certain on this one, the Elementalist's aspect could be the better choice, but I'm unsure about this. If you are experiencing mana problems for some reason, you can mix and match the aspects on your rings with something like the Recharging or Prodigy aspect. Finally, the obligatory stats with 10,000 attack power, 8,700 armor, and 12,800 life. All resistances are capped, thanks to our Paragon boards. In terms of damage, the focus is on damage to non-physical because of the Frigid Fate Paragon legendary node for additional damage to vulnerable enemies, and our damage reduction stats are decent, although upgradable and exchangeable with more damage reduction focused Paragon nodes. We have mana cost reduction of 25%, standard movement speed of 147%, and a lucky hit chance of roughly 60%. Regarding Vampiric Powers, we are starting from the top with Domination, which gives us 24% multiplicative damage on stunned, immobilized, frozen, and feared enemies. Since this is often the case, it's a free and almost guaranteed damage multiplier. We then got the Ravenous Power on the right for a lucky hit chance of up to 20% to increase our attack speed by 40% of our total movement speed for 6 seconds. To remember, the enhanced ball lightning aspect is scaling with attack speed, which is also why we are focusing on capping our movement speed on boots and the amulet at the 200% level. We are getting close to this with the additional movement speed bonus after killing an elite. Skill tree passives and Paragon nodes can also help achieve this goal. The current bonus with my gear is 59%, which is still improvable by a few percent but definitely something to work with. Accursed Touch is another power based on a lucky hit chance that can inflict the vampiric curse on enemies, with another chance to spread to other enemies. This is how we make enemies vulnerable, as you will see in a second. Releasing the stored souls that can deal additional damage gives this a nice touch, but it is not something the build is highly reliant on. You could use Metamorphosis instead to guarantee the unstoppable effect for 4 seconds, but I didn't like how something feels odd with the movement speed after evading. It's very abrupt and kind of interrupts the flow. We then use Call Familiar for calling and bat strikes from above, which also adds a nice touch to this whole vampiric theme, but more importantly, it can stun enemies around you with a 30% chance. You can also go with Anticipation to reduce the ultimate cooldown of unstable currents by 20%. If you are playing with damage over time effects such as burning, you can benefit even more from it, but the 12% increased damage per enemy seemed to be limited to a maximum of 3 enemies while I was playing around with it. Still, this could be another reason to look into burn synergies despite only a few autocasted skills from unstable currents profiting from this. Last but not least, Prey on the Weak, which makes all enemies affected by the Vampiric Curse vulnerable, and it gives a nice multiplicative bonus of 16% on top. Heading over to the skill tree and starting from the top, it doesn't matter which basic skill you choose, but you have to put 2 points into any of them to your liking. A single point goes into the Frozen Orb core skill to use its enchantment for chilling and a chance to freeze enemies. We then get 3 ranks of Elemental Dominance via our amulet for a damage increase of 9% when casting core and mastery skills above 50 mana. We also put at least 1 point into Chain Lightning for the enchantment, which works well with the Static Surge legendary Paragon node. We continue this with 2 more points to unlock the Destructive Chain Lightning passive for a 30% chance to form a crackling energy. For defensive skills, we go with Flame Shield to become immune and unstoppable, which also is mana due to our unique pants and allows us to get quickly rid of bigger packs of enemies. We use Teleport with the Shimmering upgrade for 30% damage reduction for 3 seconds after use and to make us unstoppable every 4 to 8 seconds. You would want to take advantage of at least 3 points into Glass Cannon for a multiplicative damage increase of 18% and incoming damage increase of 9%. You can certainly go higher with this build, up to 8, when using Raiment for a 48% increase. I use Ice Armor for the barrier and mana regeneration via Enhanced Ice Armor, but you can use these points elsewhere without a problem. Put 1 point into Elemental Attunement for a chance to reduce the defensive skill cooldowns every 10 seconds. For Conjuration skills, we go with 3 points into Precision Magic to increase the lucky hit chance by 15% and put 3 points in total into Lightning Spear with Enhanced and Invoked Lightning Spear to stun enemies on and off screen. The Conjuration Mastery gives us another damage boost with 3% damage per active conjuration. You will have lightning spears surrounding you most of the time, so expect an increase of 6 to 9% on average. We move on with Align the Elements and benefit from gaining 6% damage reduction per second up to 40% with it persisting even 2 seconds after being hit. Then Mana Shield, for 21% damage reduction after spending 100 mana, and protection to get a barrier whenever we use a cooldown. We go all in on the Ball Lightning Mastery skill, 5 ranks plus the 3 we are getting from the amulet, and then use Enhanced Ball Lightning for the damage rate increase by 200% of our attack speed. Whether you go with Mage's Ball Lightning to constantly stun close enemies around you or Wizard's Ball Lightning is up to you. Both have their pros and cons in terms of damage to stun and mana regeneration when consuming crackling energy. Static Discharge is used for a lucky hit chance to form additional crackling energy while our shock skills Critically Strike and Invigorating Conduit to make use of all that energy by restoring our mana. In the Ultimate Skills section we get access to the Hoarfrost passive through Permafrost to deal 9% increased damage to chilled enemies and 18% to those who might become frozen along the way. Then take the whole Unstable Currents branch with Prime Unstable Currents for a 25% increased attack speed while active and Supreme Unstable Currents to make crackling energy pulse 25% faster with no charges, greatly helping to reduce our shock skill cooldowns further. Again, we use Coursing Currents to get to Electrocution for enemies dealing less damage and Convulsions for a lucky hit chance to stun enemies when hit by a shock skill. We wrap this up with the Overflowing Energy Key passive for cooldown reduction of our shock skills each time crackling energy hits an enemy. We continue with the Paragon boards overview. We use 6 Paragon boards for this build in total while all used glyphs are maxed out at level 21 for maximum effect, but level 15 is enough to unlock their bigger radius and additional bonuses. In the first board, we use the Tactician glyph to grant a 125% bonus to all rare nodes within range. We also get 10% increased multiplicative damage when casting one of our defensive skills and grab all 4 rare nodes for maximum damage and resistances. The second board is the heart of our build with the Static Surge legendary node which synergizes well with the Chain Lightning enchantment to make enemies vulnerable and restore 10% of our mana. We use the Adept glyph to boost our mastery skill damage and also increase the lightning balls area by 20% and go with 4 more rare nodes for damage to stun enemies. On the third board, we use the Enchantment Master legendary node to strengthen our enchantments by reducing Chain Lightnings and Frozen Orbs mana costs for additional casts. We then go with the Elementalist glyph for benefiting from the non-physical damage rare node and resistances as well as applying at least another constant 10% multiplicative damage with lightning and cold damage to enemies. This board also helps us to reach the resistance caps by grabbing 5 of its rare nodes. The fourth board is Icefall, not because of its legendary node, but because of the increased damage reduction we get from chilled enemies thanks to the Frozen Orb enchantment. We use the control glyph for damage to crowd-controlled enemies and benefit from another multiplicative damage increase of 10% to chilled, up to 20% to stunned and frozen enemies. We only get the damage reduction rare node and move on to the fifth board, Frigid Fate. The reason why we invested so much into non-physical damage before is this legendary node, as we receive 10% of the total amount of our bonus damage with cold as damage to vulnerable, resulting in a multiplicative damage increase of 22%. Depending on your critical strike chance, you can either go with the destruction glyph for additional critical strike damage and a multiplier of 12%, or the exploit glyph with damage to vulnerable and a multiplier of 10%. We don't want to miss out on the 2 to 3 legendary nodes for additional damage to vulnerable and damage reduction against vulnerable enemies. Our last board is Ceaseless Conduit, where we leave the legendary node behind and go for the charged glyph for increased crackling energy damage and a damage multiplier of up to 15% to our overall damage. As mentioned earlier, there are some options to switch out some of these glyphs with more damage reduction related ones. One is Reinforced, which gives a damage reduction of 15% while having a barrier. The other one is Territorial, for increased damage to close enemies and an equivalent damage reduction of 15%. And this, my fellow sorcerers, concludes this video. This final run was done while I was playing around with maxing out Glass Cannon with Raiment of the Infinite and the Undying Vampiric Power for recovering 3% life when casting a skill. It's also one of the faster dungeon layouts with more forgiving enemies, so I can only recommend trying it out for yourself and experimenting with it. I enjoy it a lot. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions or suggestions. I am happy to answer any of them in the comments below. Thank you, have fun, and see you next time. Goodbye.